Well, welcome to Lecture 8. It's a synopsis lecture on change management and quality management. As I've said on each other occasion, this is just a synopsis of the lecture, and for study and reference purposes, you should use the full lecture. Today it is Change Management and Quality Management, Lecture 8, and as you can see, we're about 2/3 of the way through the teaching lectures, and then Lecture 13 is the course review and feedback. Today we'll be talking about change management and quality management, and again the learning points associated with them. So let's get into it. Firstly, change management. Nietzsche said that the people that said the only thing in life that is constant is change were wrong, as even change has changed. My mother used to say that the world is changing so quickly and it's very hard to keep up with it. And that's happening not only in our lives but also in the workplace. And change management is a structured approach to transitioning individuals, teams and organisations from a current state to a desired future state. So a little bit like safety management, going from a current state to a desired future state. There's two types of change. There's evolutionary change, or incremental change, some books call it, where we go from where the organisation is, slowly change and adapt it until it gets to the shape that we want it. And of course, the opposite to that is revolutionary or transformational change. And that's where, it's like the Big Bang, where you come in and let's change. Let's change our direction, let's change our goals, let's change our organisation and so forth. In very basic terms, there's three elements that need to be managed during the process of change. There's people, there's the organisation, and there's resources. So we need to change all three in sympathy with each other. And also there's a discussion about whether there's a fourth element that needs to be managed during that process, and that's technology. Let's talk first about changing people. Changing people is about changing attitudes, expectations, perceptions and behaviours. It's not easy. If I try and change you, for example, I can't just do that by clicking my fingers. What I need to do is go through a process of reconditioning you to a different way of thinking. The process of organisational development focuses on the techniques or programs to change people and the nature and quality of interpersonal relationships in the organisation. In its ultimate form, the process may require some people to leave the organisation and people with different skills, knowledge and attitudes to join it. With organisational change, managers need to understand that all reorganisations don't occur spontaneously. Just because you've made a decision that the organisation will change doesn't mean it'll happen. You've actually got to state what the change will be, plan towards the change, and then dedicate the resources to it to make it happen. So this requires an understanding of the cognitive, these are the process of perception and knowledge, and the behavioural aspects of managing an organisation to achieve superior financial performance. So you've got to go through this process of change. There's also a cautionary note when talking about organisational change about distressed organisations. Research indicates that senior management should be focusing on maximising efficiency and effectiveness of the current organisation rather than diverting the resources required to undertake a reorganisation during such situations. So what does that mean? What it means is that if your organisation is distressed, you're having troubles with profitability or you're having troubles with output, you shouldn't be reorganising. What you should be doing is trying to fine-tune the organisation to ensure that it returns to a healthy state before you take on such tasks as reorganisation, which do take resources up. Changing resources is not a simple task. It may require changing priorities, requiring additional funds through loans or advances, or increasing revenue through additional sales. So once the funds are available, it then takes time for them to wash through, let's use the term wash through the organisation into the appropriate areas where you want the change to occur. Kotter, John Kotter has a book, it's called The the leading change is shown here. He's from the Harvard Business School, and he's one of the most influential academics dealing with change management. His book, Leading Change, written in 1966, has 8 steps about successful change, and it's considered to be a major reference source. He's authored 18 books, with 12 becoming top sellers. A student that I had previously indicated to me that he was in an organisation and he was trying to manage change. He was the change manager, and he'd forgotten about Kotter's work, which I'd covered in this lecture, and the change wasn't occurring as quickly or as deeply as they hoped. And he actually got a copy of John Kotter's book, Remembering the Lecture, and he implemented the 8 steps, and he said it was very effective in that organisation, which is quite a large organisation with many different offices around Australia. And Kotter's 8 steps for positive change include establishing a sense of urgency, creating the guiding coalition, developing a vision and strategy, communicating the change vision, empowering broad-based action, generating short-term wins, consolidating gains and producing more change, and anchoring the new approaches in the culture. So from that perspective, it's not easy. Change isn't easy, and Kotter's 8 steps help us through that process. And it gives us a strategy in which to ensure that an organisation transfers from its current state to its desired future state. In the full lecture, I go through Kotter's 8 steps for positive change in far more detail. Like all things, there's the converse, and Kotter covers in his writings about the obstacles to change that occur. Allowing too much complacency. Oh yeah, this is where we want to go, but look, it doesn't really matter if we don't get there tomorrow or the next week. Lack of a substantial coalition. I've seen this occur in organisations where the CEO wants change, but he can't communicate that change to the lower level. There's no clear vision. What will the future look like? Well, who knows? So if you don't know what the end state will be, how do we get there? Failure to communicate the vision, allowing roadblocks to be set up, and often the vested interest in the organisation. If you want to change, for example, and affect the whole financial function and reduce numbers in the finance area, for example, they'll set up a roadblock for the change. You need to celebrate quick wins. Through the change process, always celebrate your quick wins and use them as an example to move forward. Declaring victory too early. You should continue the change momentum until you get to that desired future state and not say, hey, we're already there, so don't declare that victory too early. And failure to change the corporate culture, again, is another obstacle to change. So that's change management, a very brief overview. I'll now talk about quality management. The history of quality management is really interesting because the ancients initiated the quality process by establishing the units of weight and dimension. And through the Middle Ages, trade and craft guilds set standards for quality, as well as working conditions and wages. And the Industrial Revolution saw the spread of mass production with jigs, templates and moulds, and complex manufacturing work carried out by relatively untrained people. So in the Industrial Revolution, if you have a look at that picture to the bottom right, here's the 8 or 10-year-old boys operating the loom, and again that was quite common. The supervisors had the responsibility for quality management until scientific management came along, and the work of Frederick Winslow Taylor, he was a lathe operator and foreman in the 1880s, and he noticed that the workers approached the same task differently. So if they were building a wheel, for example, they built it differently. And he said, hey, no, look, there must be one best way to build a wheel. And so he said, let's discover what that is or work out what that is, and everyone will do it that way. So this was called the Scientific Management School, and there's all different sorts of aspects of the Scientific Management School in the text. And it was about improving the production process, especially labour, by analysing the process in an attempt to improve production efficiency and quality. So workers were now having their performance standardised and measured, and this was the first steps towards taking responsibility for quality. The statistical process control, Walter Schuhart wrote about this. He worked at Bell Laboratories, and he said that measurements should be taken of all inputs and at every stage of the production process. And Bell at the time were making telephones, and he said, hey, the only way to make quality telephones is let's measure everything as part of the production process. And people such as Henry Ford and Carl Friedrich Benz progressively introduced these concepts into the mass production process in the 1920s. During World War II, many of these approaches became less important as there was an emphasis on production numbers, and post-production reworks became common. So an aircraft production line, they build the aircraft, they get to the end, they'd then ground run the aircraft, they'd start all 4 engines. If all 4 didn't start, they'd push the aircraft to the side to be reworked at a later time, and then brought out the next aircraft off the production line. So reworks became common. People forgot the lessons that had been learnt in the 20s and the 30s about the need to use quality control measures. Edwards Deming, he was a statistician. He's considered to be the father of quality management. He was working as an academic in the 1950s, and he was using the theories of people such as Walter Schuhart. And amongst others, he was invited to assist in the reconstruction of Japan. And his mantra was that improving quality will reduce costs. So they'll reduce production costs while increasing productivity and market share. And the Japanese manufacturers applied his techniques, and by the 1960s they were producing world-leading products. Deming used what he called the Schuhart model, saying that achieving high quality was a 4-step program that you need to plan, so you establish the objectives and processes necessary to deliver the expected output. You implement the processes, especially on a smaller scale, and then building up. You check, so you measure the new processes and compare the results against the expected results to ascertain any differences, and you act. You analyse the differences and determine their cause, and then you go back through the plan, do, check, act again. In more simple terms, plan for what you want to do. You do it, you check it, and if it's not right, you act upon it. And again, so you need to then plan for the change, do the change, check and act. So by going through this process, it's about conformance. So instead of having, say, 5 and up 100 items that you produce having faults in them, because you're working on what the faults are, you're now reducing your fault level down to less than 1 in 100. So that's the plan, do, check, act approach. What is quality? Quality is the degree to which a set of inherent characteristics fulfill requirements. So it's a measure of excellence, or a state of being free from defects, deficiencies and significant variations brought about by the strict and consistent adherence to measurable and verifiable standards to achieve uniformity of output that satisfies specific customer or user requirements. Lots and lots of words. So what do all those words mean? Those words mean is you want to produce the same thing, exactly the same every time. And if there's any deviations, any defects, deficiencies or significant variations, you'll act upon those to ensure that they don't occur again. So quality management has 3 major components: quality control, quality assurance and quality management. And some texts also include quality planning as a major component. Quality management has grown beyond manufacturing to be used in all organisations, including government agencies use quality management these days that produce goods and or services. So, what's the maturing concept of quality management? First, it was about quality control. From the 1950s to now, it was about measuring all of the inputs that you use, detecting any faults at the end of it and acting upon it. That was quality control. Quality assurance was not only what you do, but also what all your suppliers do, what your customers' expectations are, and what you're doing now is you're working on preventing faults and deficiencies. And quality management is about the direction and the documentation of that whole process, and making sure that at the end of it your organisation is running to peak efficiency with regards to quality. And let's face it, your efficiency and effectiveness are greatly improved if you don't have to do reworks, or every time you produce something, you're producing it to a consistent standard. So from that perspective, it adds a lot of value to your organisation. Schuhart talked about some principles of his approach, and Walter W. Deming, was it, built on them. And he said that there are 8 principles of quality management. There's customer focus. You've got to be very focused on what the customer wants. You need to provide leadership to it. You need to involve the people that are in the process. They need to be involved. There's a process approach. You need to understand that it's a process. A follows B follows C. There's a systems approach, just not A follows B, but what got us to A, what got us to B, the whole systems. There's that continuous improvement. A large theme of quality management is about continuous improvement. We've been doing the same thing, producing airline seats now for 35 years in this company, but we adopt a continuous improvement process and we're doing it better and better every day. And there's a factual approach to decision making. Everything has to be based on data analysis and information. Not just gut feeling, not let's just go here, let's do that. Let's make factual decisions. And there's the mutual beneficial supplier relationships. You need to be working with your suppliers to make sure that they're producing the appropriate goods and services to you that are of the right quality to add to your business. There's a value add that they need to provide you with to ensure that you can come up with the best outcomes for your business. So the 8 principles of quality management about customer focus, leadership, involvement of people, process approach, systems approach, continuous improvement, factual approach to decision making, and mutual beneficial supplier relationships. So a quality management system, now we're talking about the whole system, has a requirement for all business processes to be documented. And the reasons to document it are many-fold, as shown here. And we document using the ISO 9000 series of documents. And the International Standards Organisation, or the International Organisation for Standardisation, ISO, and the differences between the French term for the organisation and the English, but ISO publishes ISO 9001, which is the world standard for quality management. ISO 9001 to the 2008 edition is the latest version. It can be applied to any organisation, large or small, in any sector, and whether it's a business enterprise, a public administration, or a government department. It provides a systems approach to manage the production of goods and services, satisfying the customer's quality requirements and complying with regulations. And the objective is to ensure that everyone is clear about who is responsible for doing what, when, how, why and where. It's about process standards that will be applied as part of the business activity. It gives the requirements for what the organisation must do to manage its processes affecting quality as outlined in the 8 principles that we talked about earlier. And there's also a provision for an organisation to be externally audited. And once it's externally audited and meets the standards of ISO 9001, is then permitted to display that it is a quality endorsed company. And often government organisations, for example, will only deal, or aircraft manufacturers only deal with companies that are quality certified. So sometimes it can aid your business. There's a number of different variants of the quality philosophy, some which are minimalist and others that place total reliance on the quality philosophy. So in some organisations, for example, they might only use quality for the manufacturing process, whether it's manufacturing goods or services. In other organisations, they take a more holistic approach, and this is what is termed total quality management. And it's based on the premise that the quality of the goods and services is the responsibility of everyone involved with their creation or consumption. You work in finance, but you're involved in that process. So you need to be involved in the quality management system. It capitalises on the involvement of management, the workforce, suppliers and customers in order to meet or exceed the customer's expectations. And the approach is proactive. And from that perspective, it's important. Quality management, or total quality management, is said in simple terms, it's the only way of managing our business. It's based on the three mantras of organisational commitment, cross-functional communications in the organisation. We're all here for the one good. What we do, we're proud of, we document it. When there's deviations from the documentation, we then sit and examine why. And it's about a collaborative culture within the organisation. Some of the characteristics or some of the things that quality management organisations do, they hold quality circles where they'll engage the workforce. They might have 6 to 12 volunteer employees who will meet regularly. They'll discuss a common work activity, they'll identify problems and they'll propose problems. So maybe it'll be about purchasing spares for machinery. Well, you don't just have the engineers there, you also have the people, the supply people there, you have the finance people there, and you have the administrative people there in the quality circle to say how you can improve those processes. There's the empowerment of staff, suppliers and customers in the decision-making process. We're looking for efficiency, we're looking for rationalisation. And in a pure total quality management environment, you might find staff actually recommending staff reductions or job shares occur, that people are underutilised and it would be better if that they worked in a job share situation in another area where there's excess work. There's benchmarking. A really important part about quality management is the concept of benchmarking, and it's about the continuous processing of measuring goods, services and your practices against the toughest competitors or those acknowledged as industry leaders. Singapore Airlines for many years now has been considered to be the benchmark airline in the world when it comes to service. It's facing a lot of stiff competition as a result of that. Which is changing its fortunes as we speak. But benchmarking, most important. It's not just about what I'm doing, what my organisation's doing and how we're doing, it's what is my competitor doing? The one who's my toughest competitor. What are they doing? And keeping an eye on them, benchmarking your performance against theirs. And that's what happens in the airline industry. AirAsia, for example, in producing the lowest cost seats in the industry, is benchmarking its performance against other airlines. And companies like EasyJet and Ryanair, they're examining their costs of providing seats to the travelling public and measuring themselves against their competitors. Outsourcing. Rather than having everything inside the organisation, you're using the skills, knowledge and expertise of those outside the organisation to get savings and quality improvements. And reduce time cycles. A reduction in cycle times improves overall company performance. It focuses on improvements to achieve outcomes with minimal cost. And again, that's an important thing to remember. What we're after here is reducing the time spent in producing the goods and services. That theory or that concept of continuous improvement, there's a need to continually improve what we do. Some of the changes might be small, they might be incremental, or in just small parts or across the whole organisation. And everyone in the organisation is tasked for looking for opportunities for improvement and suggesting them to the organisation. Okay, in this lecture we've showing the learning points, which is what we do at the end of each lecture, and again this is the basis for the exam. And we've covered change management, we've covered quality management, I've shown you the learning points, and next week, if you have sufficient time, it might be good to have a look at analytical tools and risk management. Really interesting lecture. The risk management is focused more on enterprise risk management rather than operational risk management, which is the subject of safety management systems. Well, I look forward to seeing you in the next synopsis lecture, Lecture 9. Thank you.